I've been playing with ChatGPT and I'm beginning to think that it is the single greatest no-code tool available. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to build your own ChatGPT chatbot directly inside of your Airtable base. But more importantly, I'm going to show you how to use ChatGPT as your no-code co-pilot to really level up your no-code game. So let's go.
No code, oh yeah, yeah. No code.
This is ChatGPT inside of Airtable. I've used Airtable Interface Designer to create a chatbot type experience that sits on top of a Airtable database that I'll show you the layout of in just a second. But just to demonstrate the app to you here, you have a chat box to enter your prompt. When you've entered your prompt, you hit submit and you're going to get a response back from the OpenAI. And then all of your chat history and messages are going to be stored and saved and presented down here so that you can reference them and come back to them again. Down the bottom of the app, we have a settings panel. And so this is where you can essentially create your different conversations. Similar to ChatGPT itself, you've got the ability to have different chats over here. And over here, then it has a record of all of your history and your messages relating to each of the chats. With GPT-4, it looks for you to input what's called a system prior to creating your prompts. And essentially all the system is another origin prompt for that particular ChatGPT model or that particular ChatGPT conversation. So a really good example of this, if we could actually add a new one here and we will call it our no-code co-pilot, no-code pilot. So essentially what a system is what we want ChatGPT role to be. So in this case, we want ChatGPT to be our no-code co-pilot. So I'm going to put in a few sentences as the system, and the system will be sent with each and every one of your prompts so that every time you're interacting with ChatGPT in that conversation, it will know what way or what is the context of how you are looking for it to help you. So in this one, we'll go, you are a helpful no-code assistant. Your primary aim is to work with no-coders to help them build out and progress in their no-code projects. You will be creative and helpful and will acknowledge that the user is a no-coder and does not have any real knowledge of coding itself. So if you are providing code as part of a project build, please ensure that you provide easy to understand descriptions and notes. Okay. So that would be a good starting point for a no-code co-pilot. And again, this is something that you can always tweak and come back to and edit. If you're not getting the desired results in your ChatGPT conversation, you can come in here and put in an extra sentence or remove a sentence if it's being too restrictive. So we'll hit create here. And essentially, we now have our no-code co-pilot created and ready to interact with us. So essentially what I'm going to do up here is maybe just ask a one or two prompts to this no-code co-pilot and just see what level of results we're getting. In the build, what I've programmed into it is that you can have GPT-4 as the model or GPT 3.5 Turbo. What I've noticed with it is it's much faster, but it's also much cheaper. Not that GPT-4 is overly expensive, and I did actually use GPT-4 for helping me in this build because it was far more accurate and I was getting much more reliable results, and it was therefore reducing actually the number of prompts that I had to do. So anyway, if we just put in a few generic questions just to demonstrate how this works. So what are the best no-code tools in 2023 ? Okay. And so it hit submit. And this should be sending out a request now to OpenAI itself. And hopefully shortly we will get a response into our current response here. So it's saying they're thinking we'll respond shortly and we'll see what it comes up with here. And there we go. We have our response. So the first thing you'll probably notice is that when we asked the question in our Airtable interface, we didn't get that nice typing along effect that you would get if you asked it inside of ChatGPT itself. So let's just ask it directly inside of ChatGPT itself. What are the best no-code tools in 2023? And you'll see here, as soon as you ask this, it starts writing immediately, which is probably a nicer interface, but there are definitely a lot of benefits to having this inside of your Airtable base, and we'll talk about that in a little while as to why you want to do this. But also it's just fun to build something like this, and also as a learning project in terms of how to build something while using an artificial intelligence as your co-pilot. I can't believe I'm even saying that in a video in early 2023. It seems unbelievable how fast things have progressed and how incredible this is, and what this opens up to us no coders in terms of what we are actually able to build now. It's really taken us from being able to build things that are limited maybe by the no-code tools that we're using to now being able to go to Copilot and being like, here, I'm having a difficulty with this. How do I take it to the next level? So we come back now. Okay, it's giving us the response here. Okay, and obviously anybody that is a no-coder out there, you'll be very familiar with all of these. And I can certainly say that all of these are great apps. It's got Bubble, it's got Zapier, it's got Airtable. I don't know why it's Zapier so weirdly there. I don't know. Do you say Zapier or Zapier? Let me know in the comments below. It's got Webflow, it's got Glide, Adalo. So it's got what, 3 front end tools there. Notion is maybe in the Airtable here. It's definitely a productivity tool. Bubble is definitely a sort of jack of all trades. It's the front end. It's got a database in it, but it's really primarily at web app and website building. There's no mention of some of my favorite tools being Make.com, formerly Integromat, or Softer. So if we come back here into things, so it's funnily enough, it's given us virtually the exact same response, but it's added in a few more. Oh, it gave us Integromat here in this response. And it's given us Coda, which is really amazing. If anybody hasn't tried Coda, give it a shot. It's really quite an amazing tool. AppSheet, that's another front end builder. And it's captured all of the other ones that we saw in the other list. And so we might just ask this one more question again, just to show you the functionality here. It's storing our chat history down here. And every time you ask it something, this is actually a record inside of your Airtable base in the back end. So it just means you've got your sort of forever history. And meanwhile, every time you ask a question here against the no-code Copilot conversation, ChatGPT has the context of your chat history. So it can build and learn and develop based on your previous interactions and hone in on the next best response. And that part is what is so critical to it being so useful as a sort of co-builder or project assistant that works with you as you're building any projects out there. So if we just put in, if you were a no coder and you could only learn one new concept this year, what would it be? Question mark. I will hit submit. And there. So if I were a no coder and could only learn one new concept this year, I would recommend learning about APIs. That sounds like something I have said in a few videos in the past. APIs are a way for different software applications to communicate with each other and exchange data. By learning how to use APIs, you can integrate different tools and services together to create more powerful and efficient workflows. Again, I'm always consistently amazed at the level or the accuracy of a lot of the information. And this is only GPT 3.5. GPT-4, I've noticed a marked improvement. I've noticed it is even more scarily powerful and capable. Okay, anyway, that is the demonstration of the app that we are going to build. And you'll see here's our chat history, and it all comes in and it's time-stamped, and you can click into it and you can see the full message and it's all there. Okay, so if we jump into the Airtable base, this is a pretty good project for giving you an overall feel for Airtable and what it's capable of, because it'll be using the database, automations, and also Airtable interface designer. I'll do a walkthrough of the database layout and show you exactly how this is laid out and the logic for why it was laid out this way. We'll jump into the automation. I'll show you exactly how to configure the automation and what you'll need to put in there. And then we'll go into Airtable interface designer. I'll show you how I set up the interface just like this. And so you can essentially reproduce this or recreate it step by step, and it might give you inspiration as to how you could tailor this or how you could adapt this for other use cases. Airtable interfaces is really good for internal type use cases or internal tools. It's maybe not so good if you want to open this up to external users. But the great thing about using Airtable is that if you have the logic flow built in the data and the automation section of the base, you can of course use a third party interface or front end option, for example, or Webflow, or one of those other no-code front-end tools that you're familiar with already. And you can essentially plug this Airtable base into that front end. You can either integrate it with an existing project that you have if you want to add a sort of chat component to it or an AI component to it, or you could make it just a bespoke feature itself, whereby you craft a particularly good system and a particularly good prompt that your users then add on to when they're asking a question. But anyway, for today, we'll just focus on the internal use case. I do find myself using this quite a bit. You can see there I've got an Airtable script assistant. I've got a no-code copilot that we just created in the demo. And I had a coffee specialist when I was actually setting this up to play around with it as well. And there's already lots of other things that I've started using it for. And it's really useful. It's also that it keeps track of everything inside of an Airtable base. But I've also found in some of my other bases, I've been able to just add in these two logic flows into the base and actually being able to attach basically a conversation to an individual record and pass information from whatever that record is into the conversation. And so there's just some pretty interesting starting out use cases that you can start to do. So what we have here is the first table is ChatGPT conversation, and every row or record in this table, it represents a conversation. And when I say a conversation, it really means what role do you want the AI to take on? So that's the whole idea of this system thing in terms of over time, you might build out various roles in terms of what you like to get help with or what you like to use that particular configuration of the artificial intelligence to help you with a certain aspect of something. And what is a conversation made up of? It's made up of ChatGPT messages, and that's what the second table is. And that's it. There's just two tables in this build. And what I'll show you is I'll just go through every single field so you can follow along. And if you want to produce this, you can, of course. What I would recommend if you are producing this, I'd use the exact same field name as I have used here, and that will make sense as to why you might do that in a little bit. So if we scroll along here, you've got name, which is just a single text field. You've got system, prompt, and OpenAI response, which are all long text fields. These two, system and prompt, are going to be your primary input fields, so where you're actually writing text in yourself manually, the old-fashioned way. And then OpenAI response is going to be the current response to the current prompt. And that's going to be the current response from OpenAI after we do the API call. And then every single time you submit a prompt, a message is going to be created in the ChatGPT messages table. And that message is going to be linked to whichever AI you're chatting with. So whether you're chatting with your no-code copilot or whether you're chatting with your Airtable script assistant, it will attach the relevant new record in messages to that particular conversation. And why that's important is because the power of ChatGPT is that it retains the context of the conversation with each prompt that you're sending. So when you send the first prompt, you'll get a response. That might be a pretty good response, but you might like to clarify something or you might like to change something. And that's where when you send the next prompt, AI is going to know what it said previously and what you said previously. And so it can now iterate and build on it and think more and produce just a better result over time as you work together. And this is where this whole co-pilot type concept comes from. It's actually a back and forth as you work through a project. Yeah, this single select action field is the critical field for triggering the automation. So the default is that it's at ready. And then in the interface, when I hit submit on this button, all it was doing was updating this field to submit. And that is what the automation is looking out for in order to trigger the automation in terms of calling the OpenAI API, fetching the response and pasting the response in here, and then also creating a brand new record in the ChatGPT messages table, which stores a history of the system, the prompt, the OpenAI response, and it links it to the conversation that is relevant to, and it'll store it there for the next time that you send a prompt through this record again. So as in each time, you'd be basically deleting out your prompt here, and you'll be putting in a new prompt. Is it better to no code or to code ? And you can trigger it from here as well if you wanted. You can just simply go submit, and you're using this record as the record that you're seeing in your interface. And there's our response back now anyway, but you're essentially reusing this over and over again. And that's why you might hone and craft your system over time for each of the different types of assistants or co-pilots that you would like to build. And meanwhile, it's added the response as a chain of messages in your messages table. Where did we get to? So if we come over here, this delete button is nice to have. It's not a must have. And it was just something I got help with from the Airtable script assistant to write a script with me that basically lets you reset this particular record or whichever one you click it on. So what it's going to do is it's going to find all of the related messages, and it's actually going to hard delete those messages. They're going to no longer exist. It's not just going to break the link. It's going to delete the records that represents the messages. And so it's essentially resetting the conversation to nil completely. It's not, the data is now lost. You're not going to be able to retrieve it. But sometimes you might want to do that because you might have a particularly long or unwieldy conversation and you might want to reuse the system. And so it's just another thing, but you don't need to do that. And of course, you could just manually delete them out there or find the messages in here and manually delete them out. Next thing is something I tend to do on nearly every table that I have inside of an Airtable base, and it's to do a formula field here that exposes the unique record ID for each row. And essentially that's the formula that you can see there. And if we come over, then there's another single select, and this is the functionality that allows you to choose what model you're using with OpenAI. So currently I just have GPT-4 and GPT 3.5 Turbo, and whichever one you have selected is going to be the model that's going to be called when the automation is run. And I found GPT 3.5 Turbo is perfect for 90% of queries. For anybody that's not that familiar with OpenAI, GPT 3.5 Turbo is a much more cost-effective model. It's something like 1/10 of the price of a GPT-3 or a GPT-4 call. And it's actually faster as well, which is nice, but it does have limitations in that it's not as accurate as GPT-4. And so what I found myself doing is using GPT 3.5 Turbo most of the time. And then if I'm running into a roadblock or something's not quite working when I'm troubleshooting it with the AI, I'm then switching to GPT-4 and seeing if it can shed some light on the situation and make it better. Obviously, pricing is a concern for people when using things like this. What I found with GPT 3.5 Turbo, the pricing is really very reasonable. Even with heavy usage over a few days, you're only going to be looking at $1 or $2 max spend. When you go to GPT-4, if you were to use it regularly, and I'm just trying to think on a monthly basis, like if you were to use it every other day fairly heavily, I could see you spending in the tens of dollars. So then you could maybe have 10 or 20 or $30 of spend using GPT-4, whereas you might only get up to $2, $3, $4, or $5 using GPT 3.5 Turbo for the same level of input. And max tokens then again is for people that aren't that familiar with OpenAI. It works on a tokens basis, as in the pricing works on a tokens basis. And then tokens are counted based on what you're inputting into the model and what's coming out of the model. And tokens are, you can almost think of them as a word, but I don't think it's quite exactly a word. I think it's something like, it works out at about 75% of a word is a token. And that's how you can gauge how many tokens you're using each time, and the pricing is per token. I generally set this as a default as a starting point to 300 to 500 tokens. And the only reason you'd make this bigger is if you're doing a particularly long blog article or something with ChatGPT, or if you're doing a long script, for example, and you just want to have an unbroken large output received back. But I suppose the reason to keep a limit on it is also so that your responses are limited, and you're not going to be using more tokens than you necessarily need to. So you can configure this manually, and again, it'll feed whatever value you have here into the automation, and it will tell OpenAI that's the tokens that you want to use, essentially. And that's it for this table. So we jump into the second table then, which is ChatGPT messages. Every row in here now represents a message, and it represents the prompt that we sent to OpenAI, the response that we got back from OpenAI, and that's in this ChatGPT column here. It's got the conversation or co-pilot or assistant that it is linked to in the GPT conversations table. And first field, again, this is not really a must-have. It's just the way I like to set it up. It's a formula field. And all it is doing is it is concatenating the prompt and the ChatGPT response with user and ChatGPT before both of those, so that it looks like at a glance you can see what the user said and what ChatGPT said. So it's basically those two fields there. These two are long text fields. And if we come over, then we have a created time field, which is a handy field inside of Airtable that will automatically give you the date and time that this row or record was created. So obviously that's useful for in the context of a message. It's giving you the time that the message was created, essentially. And then the system, the reason I have system in here, and again, everything in this table is coming in automatically from the automation. So there's nothing you actually manually input in here. The system is coming from the ChatGPT conversation as at the time that you submitted the prompt. The reason I included that in the build was because you might change that system over time, and it might just be a useful reference point to be able to look back and see what system did you use when you got that particular response, because you might go and change the system so much that it looks nothing like what it was at the beginning, but you might come back and realize, oh, look, it was doing a really nice job when I had the system like this. And so I might actually use that in future references. The order field here then is an auto number field inside of Airtable. And what this does is it creates a unique auto number for each new record that's created. And this is important for the build because it is used in order to sort the messages not only inside of Airtable Interface Designer, but also inside of the script in terms of OpenAI, what is the most recent messages when it's being sent with a subsequent prompt. And then we've got a lookup field to finish this table here, which is basically taking the record ID from whatever conversation or model or copilot that you're using. It's basically giving you that as a reference. And again, that's just useful. It's useful for doing things like when you have a front end on top of it, it can be useful for doing a conditional filter and things like that. But again, not overly necessary for just purely the Airtable builds. You don't necessarily need that last one for just the Airtable build. And that's it. I'll scroll back to the left here slowly, and you can pause and go through this again if you'd like to see what all the different fields are, or if you're trying to follow along. And that is it for the database part of the build. So now we move on to the automation part of the build, and we'll go through it step by step. So you can see here the trigger is when a record matches conditions, and this is looking at the ChatGPT conversations table, and when the action is submit and the prompt is not empty, then trigger this automation. And so obviously we don't want the automation to trigger if the prompt has anything in it, so that's why we've done that. And the action is what we just showed you in the last part. Is it's a single select field, and it's going to be changed to submit, whether you do it through the interface or whether you manually change the single select field in the Airtable base itself. So it's going to trigger it, and it's going to do this update record as the first step in the automation flow. And what this is doing is I put this in. This is a nice have, it's not a must have in terms of the overall thing working. So if you don't want to do this step, you can skip it. But essentially it's just to give you that sort of peace of mind that when you submit a prompt through here, this current response field in the Airtable base will clear whatever was previously there, and it will input thinking will respond shortly. So it's like a loading screen. Anybody that uses ChatGPT already will know that, like, when you submit a prompt through ChatGPT, the native ChatGPT itself, it'll start actually typing out the response as it's being generated. When you're using the API, as far as I know, now we might ask ChatGPT about this, but as far as I know, you have to wait for the response to be fully baked before it comes back to you. And it'll just be presented here in totality when it's done, as opposed to being typed out in front of your eyes. And so that was the whole idea of just building in this kind of, it's almost like a loading screen, and it just gives you the reassurance that the automation has started and is working. And it's just going to be a few seconds, because anybody that's used OpenAI will know that it just takes a few seconds to generate a response and send it back to you. So that's the end of that part of the automation. So then run a script is really the heart of getting this whole functionality to work. And this is the part that I definitely wouldn't have been able to do without actually using ChatGPT myself to do it, because I would not have been able to write the Airtable script. And ChatGPT genuinely wrote this entire script, and all I was acting as well was also a co-pilot almost in. I was taking the script from the ChatGPT response, and I was inputting it into the scripting action here, and I was testing it and running it, and I was getting error messages the whole way along. And I was feeding those error messages back GPT and just asking it, how can we fix this? What's the next step? And then I was going back and I was explaining to it that, look, I'm not a coder. I don't know if you just give me a part of the script to fix. I don't know where. I don't know if I'm definitely replacing the right part. So explain to it that, look, I'm a no coder and I'm going to need some pretty good instructions as to how to do this. And I think that's what the breakthrough was, because it just meant the artificial intelligence was coming back and it was giving me very good instructions. It was saying after row 45, put this in here, then go down to row this and put that in there and paste it in. And so it worked really well that way. To be honest, this took the longest part of the build by far. This probably took about an hour and a half in total to do this scripting part, being the back and forth with ChatGPT and the troubleshooting and the testing. And I suppose at the end of it, it worked really well. And I'm going to give you a copy of this script, and you can copy and paste it into your project. On ability terms, I might not have been able to do it myself. I am a no coder after all. And also outside of that, if I was able to do it, or if I had the ability to do it, it probably would have taken me substantially longer than an hour and a half to write a script like this. And so it's amazing, I suppose, what ChatGPT can do for us no coders. It can really let us level up our no code ability, because we can suddenly do things that we would never have been able to do before. Some people argue that, like, it's not really no code if you're running scripts, you're moving into the low code area, or even just full on coding. I would almost say, in my mind, it is still very no code, because all I've done to produce this, and this is genuine, all I've done is I have gone back and forth, and I have not written a single line of code myself. I have just asked ChatGPT, and I've explained in natural English what I want the code and the script to be able to do. and can it write the script for me? And I've been literally just copying and pasting back and forth between the two tools, between Airtable and ChatGPT, so that they could work, it could work out what it needed to do. So I do feel this is what I said at the top of the video. I feel ChatGPT is the best no-code tool ever invented. No matter what no-code tool you're doing, it's writing code for you in the background. If you're using or Webflow or Airtable even, you know, those tools, they're presenting nice interfaces to you as the no-coder so that you can create things. But those tools are creating code for you in the background, whether you know it or not. And essentially what I see ChatGPT as is basically it will do scripts for you. So if you get to a part in your project where you don't know how to progress or take it a step further, that's where ChatGPT can be an amazing co-pilot. Now, it's not going to get it right the first time. In my experience so far, it's only got it right the first time once or twice. But the whole idea is that it's meant to augment or enhance or amplify our ability, but we still need to go back to it and feed back to it and give it good enough instructions that it knows where it's gone wrong or that it knows what to do. And that's why I see it like it's basically it's almost like a user interface that allows us put in language terms what we would like to build in a software. And that's why I still see it as being in the no-code realms, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. All of the tools that I use have the ability to put in scripting, and it's another important aspect of evaluating a tool. Does it allow scripts? Software as scripts, Airtable allows scripts. And it's suddenly when you have something like ChatGPT and you also have no-code tools that can allow just that little injection of custom functionality through a script generated by ChatGPT, suddenly you can take your project from a roadblock to going to taking it to the next level. That's my own thought on it, and would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. So if we open up the actual script itself, I'll show you exactly how to configure this. And if you come down, and the key thing you'll need to do is, first of all, I'm going to give you a copy of this script and you can copy and paste it into your Airtable scripting. And the thing you will need to manually do is add these input.configs over here on the left-hand side. And if you just copy them exactly as I have them, okay, so the first one is name prompt field with a capital F. And the prompt is coming from this, when a record matches conditions and it's pulling the prompt field. And so what that is doing is it's basically feeding the prompt in from the ChatGPT conversations table into the script. And it's also going to go and look for the record ID of the conversation that you're dealing with so that it can pass the record ID into the script. And when the response from OpenAI comes back, it knows what record or conversation that it is to be pasted back into. The next thing is the OpenAI API key. You're going to need this to get it to work, and your API key is essentially the password or a password that will authenticate this script with your OpenAI account, and it'll mean that it gives authority for this script to basically access your account and charge usage of tokens to your account. So I'll show you exactly where to get your own API key. I will change this API key now because this is as good as a password essentially. And I suppose by the time you're maybe watching this video, this won't work as an API key. I will have reset it in case anybody thought they could be freeloading on my API key. It's probably not going to work. So if you come in here into OpenAI, if you not have an OpenAI account, I'd say set up account. And then the next thing you do is you come into documentation here and you're coming over to your profile over here and you're looking for view API keys. And when you go in there, you'll get an API key you can copy it, and then you just paste it manually back in here, and you'll only need to do that the first time to configure it. Then the last two bits are the max tokens field that we looked at earlier, and so again it's just taking whatever the input is as prescribed in the settings panel in your Airtable interface or on the database itself. And the last thing is the model. I was going to take whether you have selected GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 Turbo, and these are inputs into your script. And the next thing to maybe just bear in mind is to make sure that you have all of the table names and field names exactly the same as I showed you in the database part of this video. It just means you won't have to change anything else in the script. And I can't remember if I said it already, but you can get a copy of this script by looking at the description section of this video and literally copy paste it and make sure all your field names and table names match exactly as I showed you in the database part. And this should work out of the box essentially for you, just so that you know what the scripting part of this automation flow is doing. It is taking the prompt that you've input. It's also finding all of the associated messages with that conversation, and it's sending that plus the system message to OpenAI. OpenAI is then doing its magic in the back end and generating a response, and it's sending that back to you. The response is then being put into the OpenAI response field on your ChatGPT conversations table, but it's also creating a message record in the ChatGPT messages table. and it's linking that message to your conversation. The new message record saves the prompt, the system message, the response, and everything like that. So you've got a full record of every message that has happened. And then if we come back to the last update record step here in the automation flow, all this is doing is resetting your ChatGPT conversation record in the ChatGPT conversations table. And it's resetting the action to ready, so that it's basically reloaded and ready to go again with the next prompt that you input and hit submit on. Okay, so at this stage, ChatGPT should work now for you inside of Airtable. We haven't yet done the interface, but that's really just putting a nice look and feel onto basically this database structure. Also, what you could do at this stage, if you wanted to open this up to end users, is you could put a different front end on it. It doesn't have to be Airtable interfaces. But we are now at the point where you can put in a prompt and you can manually trigger the automation here. So we could put in, is using an Airtable script generated by ChatGPT still considered no coding ? Okay, so we'll fire that off and see what it comes back with. And there it is, that's kicking off now. So we know the automation has happened and OpenAI is having a think about our, let's see, does it agree with me? I think it's probably going to say something around the low coding realms, but anyway, it could be interesting. And so essentially you've got a fully functioning ChatGPT chatbot inside of your Airtable database. It's now created that fourth message there. Let's see what it did say. Using an Airtable script generated by ChatGPT would still be considered no coding as you are not writing the code yourself. So it's used the same argument that I used myself, which is pretty funny. However, it's important to note that using scripts generated by AI tools like Gen may require some technical knowledge and understanding of how the script works in order to implement it correctly. I found that's true to an extent, unless you actually just continue talking to it and just continue saying why you're having a problem or what error message you're getting from the tool that you're using and why let it use that to determine what's wrong, as opposed to it relying on you to have the technical knowledge. What you will find, as I might have already mentioned, is that you will actually start to build some of the technical knowledge as you're doing it, whether you want to or not. Maybe that's just a side effect of it. But no-code tools are designed to make it easy for non-technical users to build applications and automate workflows without writing code. But using AI generated script may still fall under the umbrella of no-code. It's important to consider whether you have technical knowledge to understand the use of the script effectively. In general, no-code tools are designed to be user-friendly and accessible to non-technical users, while coding requires a higher level of technical skill and understanding. If you're comfortable using an AI generated script and understand how it works, then it can be a powerful tool for automating workflows. I agree and disagree with this, because you don't really have to understand how the script is working to get it working, particularly for more simple scripts. Definitely, as in you can simply just keep giving it the feedback. Look, I don't understand that. I don't know why this is not working. Can you help me do it? And it has all of the technical knowledge and it's really good at it. I don't fully agree with that, but some people might. And so that again, it's just funny to see how it does have its own take on. And I would love to hear your take too. I will just jump in now and show you the interface part and how I made it look like this. Okay, so click into Airtable Interface Designer. We'll actually just build this from scratch and we'll just call it ChatGPT 2. Use the same color. We'll put a different icon on it and hit next. So I think what I used for this one was the record summary preset layout here. Now what the record summary layout is, basically it lets you select from a drop down a record, and then it lets you see all of the different fields in a nice way relating to that record. So if we hit next on that, and we're going to use ChatGPT conversations because that's got our primary input field. And what we can do here is we can then have a list block on the interface for the chosen record. And I'll show you what that means now in a second. So if we just go next to that, looks good. So we now just have to have a think about what fields from the ChatGPT conversations table that we want to have visible on our interface. It's not really important what you pick here because you can always change it and configure it later, but sometimes I do just have a quick look and see what I want to do. I'm not going to need the name because it's going to be in the drop down selection. System I do want, but I probably want it in the settings area like what I showed you earlier. Prompt I definitely want because that's an input field. OpenAI response I definitely want because that's going to be the current response. Actions I don't necessarily need to see that because what we're going to be doing is creating an interface button. And the interface button has an action that allows you to update the underlying record. And we're going to use that interface button, which is different from a record button. But we're going to use that interface button and I'll show you how to configure that shortly. Then what do we want to see? I think we probably want to see model and max token. But again, I think these are going to be down in the settings part. So system, model, and tokens is what I put down in the settings. And if we hit next, and we'll just call this ChatGPT 2. Okay, now we have finished. Now we're in our interface drag and drop designer here, which is quite nice. So I'm just going to move all this stuff down the bottom because I think that's what I grouped together as a settings thing. So if I put the record selector there, if I put system there, and then if I put model and max tokens into the same area. And I think the way I was doing it was something like this. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but you can see interface design is more of an art than a science. And I'm just going through this quickly, but when you start to group elements of fields and things like that into sort of a group structure like this, you'll get the dotted lines around it. And it just, if you hover over that section, it gives you actually a couple of formatting options. So I'm going to put that in gray so that it stands out as sort of your settings section, which can be configured down the bottom of the interface. And if we put in max tokens in here as well, and I think actually the way I left it was I left model up near the prompt, because oftentimes you want to switch. I found I wanted to switch between the models depending on the prompt that I was doing or the result that I was trying to get. And that's basically that part. Now what we need to see is this is just purely looking at one record in the ChatGPT conversations table, but I want to see all of the messages associated with whatever conversation I select. And so that's why I'm going to come in here and click all elements, and I'm going to choose, I think I went with card. Where are they? Yeah, I went with gallery here. I put that under the OpenAI. And so these cards are essentially your history of the messages in this particular conversation. If we close this part of the screen here, and next thing you can see these two things are grouped together with this dotted line. So I'm going to try and see, I think I made this pink. So it stands out as that's where the user is to direct their attention first when they come in here. You'll see they have these sort of gray lines through them. And that just is because, first of all, there's nothing selected in the record selector down here, but also because they're not editable. So I'm going to make all of the fields that I want to be editable. I definitely want the prompt to be editable because I want to be able to write something in the model. I definitely want to be editable because I want to be able to choose whether it's GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 Turbo. The OpenAI response, I don't necessarily need that to be editable, but again, I'd probably like it to be editable just in case I want to change a response for whatever reason, or if I want to click into it and copy and paste it might make it easier. And down here, these are inputs, so I definitely want to make these editable. And I think the last thing I'm going to do before we hit publish is I'm going to just add that interface button that I spoke about. And so if I come in here, I wonder will it let me choose it in here? No. So if we go to all elements and scroll down to the very bottom, there's a button here. I'm going to bring that in up beside the prompt here, try and get it above model there. You'll find that this is just trial and error to get it to fit where you want it to go. And I'll probably just expand that to make it look nice. And now I just need to configure the button, and to configure the button, I do it over here. And so it's asking what record source. And so I think I just leave that all as it is. After update, move to next record. I don't want that to happen because I want to be interacting on the same record the entire time. And that's why our automation is set up to basically reset what this submit button is doing. So when we click that, it turned the action to submitted. And then when the automation completes, it sets it back to ready. And now this button can be clicked. We just need to go into this appearance pane. And I think I made this charcoal color. And I just want to maybe change the label on it to submit. And what is it doing after update? I think I make it green. And action update record is right. Then it's saying record source that. And I think the reason I can't configure it any further is because there is no record selected currently. So we come in here and choose our no code copilot from earlier. Come up here, it's saying no update. So I'm now clicking here, add action, and I am picking the actions field and I'm changing that to submit. Okay. So every time that's clicked, it's going to change the actions field to submit, and that's going to start our automation essentially. And I think I am going to hit, last thing I need to do, I think, is just put a sort on this. So it's showing me the most recent messages first, and that's where this auto number comes in. And then we'll hit publish. So we'll just test that it's working. Do you think the viewers should subscribe to the No Code Ireland YouTube and hit like on this video ? So we'll see what it thinks about this. So we'll hit submit. There we go. And again, it just takes a little bit of time, but we do know once we see that, I suppose that's working away in the background. And there's our response. As an AI language, I don't have a personal opinion or preferences. However, if you're interested in learning more about no code, want to stay up to date with the latest news, subscribing to the No Code Ireland YouTube channel and liking their videos can be a great way to do this. It's always a good idea to support content creators who are providing valuable resources and information to so ChatGPT said it itself. I'll let you make up your own mind. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you got some value out of today's video.